Welcome to Teshuva Life, a place where we go on our knees and we plead before the Almighty for Him to transform us from the inside out so that we might live a life that is pleasing in His eyes. My wife and I welcome you to our YouTube channel, and we want you to know that regardless of where you are in your walk, whether you're someone who just stumbled onto this video by chance or someone deeply involved in the occult seeking a way out, the Almighty loves you, and He loves you so much that He gave His only Son to offer you an opportunity to enter into covenant with Him, to follow and to love His laws, decrees, and right rulings, which are for our good. But will you? That is your choice. Today we continue with Torah portion Aharei, and that means after the death, because after the death of the sons of Aaron, Moses called wait a minute. I just have a blank moment. So chapter 16, and Yahweh spoke to Moshe after the death of the two sons of Aharon as they drew near before Yahweh and died. And verse 2, and Yahweh said to Moshe, speak to Aharon, your brother, not to come into the set-apart place inside the veil before the Day of Atonement and any time, but only come once a year, and therefore make atonement for him and the people of Israel afterward. Today we're also going to continue the following parasha, Kedoshim, which stands for set-apart ones. We've been dealing this yesterday. We ended off with on the chapter 18, verse 21. And in chapter 18, it's been talking about what kind of sexual relations are forbidden. Now let us continue on verse 22. And do not lie with a male as with a woman, it is an abomination. And do not have intercourse with an beast to defile yourself with it. And a woman does not stand before a beast to mate with it, it is a perversion. Do not defile yourselves with all these. For by these the nations are defiled, which I am driving out before you. Thus the land became defiled, therefore I punish it for its crookedness, and the land vomited out its inhabitants. But you shall guard my laws and my right rulings, and not do any of these abominations, the native nor the sojourner who sojourns among you. Verse 27. Because the men of the land who were before you have done all these abominations, and thus the land became defiled. So let not the land vomit you out for defiling it, as it vomited out the nations that were before you. For whoever does any of these abominations, those beings who do them shall be cut off from among their people. And you shall guard my charge, so as not to do any of these abominable laws which were done before you, so as to not defile yourselves by them. I am Yahweh, your Elohim. Let's read the next, 14 verses. 14, 17. Yeah, let's read the next 14 verses on chapter 19. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, be set apart, for I, Yahweh, your Elohim, am set apart. Each one of you shall fear his mother and his father, and guard my Sabbaths, and I am Yahweh, your Elohim. Do not turn to idols, and do not make for yourselves molded mighty ones. I am Yahweh, your Elohim. And when you slaughter a slaughtering of peace offerings to Yahweh, slaughter it for your acceptance. It is eaten the same day you slaughter it, and on the next day, and that which is left on the third day is burned with fire. Verse 7. So it is eaten at all. So if it is eaten at all on the third day, it is abominable. It is not accepted. And he who eats it bears his crookedness, because he has profaned the set-apart offering of Yahweh, and that being shall be cut off from his people. And when you reap the harvest of your land, do not completely reap the corners of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. And do not glean your vineyard or gather every grape of your vineyard. Leave them for the poor and the sojourner. I am Yahweh, your Elohim. Do not steal, do not lie, do not deceive one another. and do not swear falsely by my name, and so profane the name of your Elohim. I am Yahweh. Do not oppress your neighbor or rob him. The wages of him who is hired is not to remain with you all night until morning. Do not curse the deaf or put a stumbling block before the blind, but fear your Elohim. I am Yahweh. And let's just read until 17. Verse 15. Do no unrighteousness in right ruling. Do not be partial to the poor or favor the face of the great, but rightly rule your neighbor in righteousness. Do not go slandering among your people. Do not stand against the blood of your neighbor. I am Yahweh. Verse 17, do not hate your brother in your heart. Reprove your neighbor for certain, and bear no sin because of him. Okay, now we are jumping into some rules and regulations as to how to behave on our daily lives. Let us keep in mind that even though these laws were given to Israel as a body and as in the land in which they were going to inhabit, and even though at the moment we're not in the land and there is not the sovereignty of the Almighty is not entirely over the people, that does not mean that many, if not all, of what is written, of the laws that are written here are still applicable for us today. There are people out there who teach that because certain laws were given to Israel as a body, and now that we don't have that going on in our time, such as instance, of course, no Levitical priesthood, no temple, no land, then that some of those things are somehow in pause or not applicable to us anymore. Let us keep in mind that we know that Satan presents himself as an agent of light, and he likes to deceive the set-apart ones and trick them into believing something that is not true. So the closer we stick to the word and we stay to the word, the less likely we'll fall prey of his schemes and his deceptions. Let us go back and just start going through some of the things that we talked about. Okay, so we left off. I got too excited, I flipped too many pages. All right, verse 22, it says, "Do not." This just continues with what kind of sexual relationships are forbidden. Do not lie with a male as with a woman is an abomination. Do not have intercourse with beasts. Defile yourselves with it. And if we go down to 24, chapter 18, we see it says, "Do not defile yourselves with all these," meaning all that we just read on chapter 18 and way more, but specifically talking about the ones in chapter 18, as far as the forbidden sexual relationships, it said, "Do not defile yourselves with all these, for by all these the nations are defiled, which I am driving out before you. Thus the land became defiled, therefore I punish it for its crookedness, and the land vomited out its inhabitants. But you shall guard my laws, my rulings, and not do any of these abominations, the native nor the sojourner who sojourns among you. Because the men of the land who were before you have done all these abominations, and thus the land became defiled. So let not the land vomit you out for defiling it, as it vomited out the nations that were before you." There you got it. So there was a situation that happened here. The reason why our forefathers were kicked out of the land is because they defiled themselves. They did that which Yahweh asked them and commanded it not to do. Now, how does that apply to us today? In what way are you defiling yourselves? And in what way am I defiling myself? Of course, I don't think there might be a few that are listening that are doing these things, but I don't think most of you would necessarily say, hey, you know what, I do this and that and that. That is talking about forbidden relationships in chapter 18. Nevertheless, it's not only about that. It's about the totality of being our whole bodies. I mean, one of the things that we keep going back over and over again is Rab Shaul on Romans 12:1, present our bodies as a living sacrifice, set apart and acceptable in the eyes of the Almighty, because it is our reasonable service. This is one of the things of what it's telling us, how to show ourselves a living sacrifice. And what is a living sacrifice? Not that we're going to kill ourselves necessarily, or we're going to be the Walking Dead. No, it has nothing to do with that. But it rather, what I think it might be saying is that we ought to die to our own fleshly desires. If you've been watching us at any length of time, you will realize that one of the main things that we talked about here at Teshuva Outreach is dying to our fleshly desires. We just read in the next chapter not to give a slanderous report. And you know what caused our forefathers to not inherit the land? At least one generation of our forefathers after they came out of the land of Egypt was a slandering report. Why? Because out of the 12 spies, 10 said that we cannot do this. The giants are too big for us. And then the people listened to them. They listened to their slanderous report, and as those, Yahweh had to destroy all that generation and then cause their children to inherit the land. So we do not want to be those people. Yes, at this moment we're somehow in the wilderness because we do not have the land. We're not living in the land. Nevertheless, there's a spiritual land that is coming, the New Jerusalem. There is Jerusalem, the Hasson, Revelation says, that is coming down from heaven. And so we want to definitely inherit the eternal rest. So right now, it might seem that we're wandering through the desert. And actually, as a matter of fact, we are wandering through the desert to a certain extent. And that's okay. That's by design, my opinion. And so, but the thing here is, let us keep coming closer to the Almighty. Let us keep coming to Him and reading His Word as we're doing right now, as we do every day. And that's why we invite you to stick along with us, to stick along with Teshuva Outreach and travel in this journey with us. This past week, as a matter of fact, what's today? Wednesday, this past Monday, we have our premiere of Shepherds and Sheep. Shepherds and Sheep, it is part of our podcast. It's something fun. Not that this is not fun, of course it is, but it's something that it's out there. It's outcry for the sheep and the shepherds. So if you please go to the website, you can listen to it. Now let us continue chapter 19. Let us make some comments on this. All right, verse 1, it says, I am Yahweh. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to all the congregation of the children of Israel, and say to them, be set apart, for I am Yahweh, I am set apart. This is when it says, be holy, for I am holy. We find something in the renewed covenant in the New Testament. We have started observing that if we pay any attention, this concept of be set apart, for I am set apart, or be holy, because I am holy, is not a New Testament, but an Old Testament concept. And so let's go to verse 3. Each one of you shall fear his father and his mother, and guard my Sabbaths. I am Yahweh, your Elohim. There is this somehow resembles one of the commandments of the Ten Commandments. It says, thou shalt respect, love, or fear the father and the mother. Of course, this does not necessarily mean to be afraid of them, like he's going to hit you or be abusive to you, but rather is reverence and respect. And by the way, this does not, now that you are grown up, you ought to thank your parents for what they did for you. Yes, some of them perhaps were abusive, but they did, it is our opinion here at Teshuva Outreach, that they did the best that they could with what they had. Unfortunately, many of them have dysfunctions that were not addressed, and they were passed down to you, the children. Maybe you have children already, and you're passing down some of those dysfunction to your children. Now is the time to break that generational pattern. You can break it. And if you need some help, we like some help, someone to pray for you and with you, please contact us. Go to our website and fill out a form, schedule an intro call, or just click the little message button on the bottom right, and we'll get right back with you within a few hours. All right, so let us continue in verse 4. Do not turn to idols, and do not make for yourselves mortal mighty ones. I am Yahweh, your Elohim. Okay, what is this telling about us? Of course, we cannot relate, as I've mentioned in these live streams before, entirely to this concept, because at this moment it's not like we have mighty ones that we just make and put in our houses. Nevertheless, there are figures out there that are from foreign gods that we ought to not to have in our homes. And I must confess, a lot of that happens because or some people travel to another country and they buy a souvenir, and not knowing that those figures are forbidden items because they were designed in most of them, if not all, were designed in the worshiping of foreign gods. If you have some questions about that, please feel welcome to get in touch with us. We'll be happy to give you the best guidance that we have and as regards to getting rid of idols in your house. All right, let's see. Now, it's talking about verse 5, a slaughtering of peace offering before Yahweh, how it ought to be performed. Again, this talks about number 5, number 6, and number 7 and 8. As I mentioned, we cannot fully relate to that, but if Yahweh had said, this is what he commands, that it is that offering is eaten on the first and the second, and someone eats that on the third, then it is perhaps a good point of view, something that we can point out, that that person was intended to eat that part of that offering up to the third day. And so when someone starts doing something to please the Almighty, as a peace offering in this case, and then they do it with an evil intent, it will show up at the end. There's only so long that someone can keep a facade, a lie, a deception, when walking in communion with the Almighty. That's what many of them just shine away from Him, and they proclaim Him every gathering that they have, but they are not really calling out to the right one. Well, at some point we'll have a teaching coming up on I'm sorry, tongue twist right now. The dangers of the teachers who claim to speak the truth when in reality they are speaking lies. Let us continue to verse number 9. Now, here's an interesting one. Number 9. So, and when you reap the harvest of your land, do not completely reap the corners of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not glean your vineyard or gather every grape of your vineyard. Leave them for the poor and the sojourner. I am Yahweh, your Elohim. Yahweh is telling them, hey, do not take everything for yourselves. Even though, yes, I'm giving you the land and give you this and give you that, you ought to think of those who are less favorably than you are. So we have to be mindful of others as well and not be just all about us and what we have. Now, in a culture like in which we live, a Western mentality, 21st century, many people would say, hey, it is my right, I own it. And that is true. And if you're one of those believers, one of those people who believe that, then that's fine. You can do as you please. But we're talking about here the ones that we're reaching here at Teshuva Outreach are those that are being stirred by the Most High. Those who realize there is something wrong that they do not necessarily know how to fix or what to do about it. That is the people that we're reaching here. And if you feel what we're feeling, and you think that the Almighty is trying to stir you in a direction that is different than the direction in which you are being led, then this is for you. And please feel welcome to reach out to us. We'll be delighted to speak with you. So it's telling here, do not take everything for yourselves, but think of the poor and the sojourner. How many of us are actually willing to give some of what we have to those who are less favorable? And I'm not necessarily talking about giving money to the person at the corner of the grocery store, which is a way of doing so. But how many are willing to just, instead of taking everything, give some back to the community? Now, that's a good question for us to think about, okay? Let us read to verse number 11. Do not steal, do not lie, do not deceive one another, do not swear falsely by my name, and do not profane the name of your Elohim. I am Yahweh. Do not oppress your neighbor or rob him. The wages of him who is hired is not to remain with you all night until morning. Do not curse the deaf or put a stumbling block before the blind, but fear your Elohim. I am Yahweh. Do no unrighteousness in right ruling. Do not be partial to the poor or favor the face of the great, but rightly rule your neighbor in righteousness. Do not go slandering among your people. Do not stand against the blood of your neighbor. I am Yahweh. Do not hate your brother in your heart. Reprove your neighbor for certain and bear no sin because of him. Now, that last verse that I just read, we have a podcast coming up on Friday, this Friday of this week, called Thou Shalt Judge. And in that, we are going to offer an alternative definition of what judging is. And that is going to have to do with set-apartness, personal holiness, as well as group holiness. And I guess I just found one of the verses in which I want to be talking about. That one right there. Reprove your neighbor for certain and bear no sin because of him. So what does that mean? Here at Teshuva Average, this is what we believe it means. It means that when there is some wrong, and okay, let's keep the parameters where this is happening. At the land, under the Levitical priesthood, have the temple, sacrifices, our self-sovereignty, so to speak, from the nations. It's not self-sovereignty, it's Yahweh's sovereignty. And there was a structure in which he implemented, but they were not in a certain rule like we are right now, in which there is the goys are the goyims are the ones who are ruling us because we live in their land after our disobedience of our forefathers. So here we go. But this is what I think it means. What it means is that if you see your neighbor do wrong, you have an obligation to correct your neighbor. Otherwise, because of the wrong that they are doing, it's going to come by and get you. Let it be because of some actions that are being wrong or the influence. And I'm not speaking here of your neighbors, like physical neighbors who are not walking this walk. Let us remember this was given to the camp. This was not given to the nations. And the sojourner over there is a proselyte, someone who was coming right along Israel, and wanted to, considering, entering to covenant. But it was someone who was following Yahweh as well, to an extent or another, as it pertained to being part of the group called Israel. And so there are people out there, because we have known of people that have had neighbors who smoke pot, and then you can smell them in their house. When you sin, you do not sin in a vacuum. Sin affects others around you, and those other people affect you as well, because you are not sinning just in your own place. Has anyone ever heard of secondhand smoke? Someone who is not smoking, but is not that far from someone who is smoking, and their smoke comes and affects us. So with that in mind, when things are working right, and there is a community of set-apart ones in which they understand that they are all under the same covenant, under the same obligation. This is, again, I'm not talking about those who are in the world. Those who are in the world have no obligation to do anything different. But those who are claiming covenant, those who claim to know Mashiach, then they are under certain obligation. Anything, it is our role and our responsibility for the sake of the camp and for the sake of Yahweh's name not being profaned and for the sake of our own integrity and obedience to the Most High. When you see your neighbor doing wrong, who is claiming to walk the walk and talk the talk and all that stuff, you do have an obligation to approach them in love, in compassion and fear and tremble, lest you sin and you fall right along with them. And so for that, we'll be addressing some of those topics on this coming Friday, and thou shalt judge. All right, let us pray. Elohim of Abraham, Elohim of Yitzhak, and Elohim of Jacob, Elohim of our forefathers who took them out of the land of Egypt, to a great and beautiful land, the most beautiful of land. That because they disobeyed over and over, after so much correction, you spilled them out of the land. The land vomited them out as it vomited out the inhabitants that were before them. Father, and as a result of that, we're still wondering. And I'm almost certain that if we were them, we would have done exactly the same thing. So it's not their fault, it's everyone's fault. It's even our fault in the areas in which we choose to compromise after you've been calling us to Teshuva, to repent. So Master, I pray thee, have mercy over your people, those whom you are calling out of the deception, out of those wolves that claim to be agents and angels of light, yet they are the devil themselves, Master, because they're sending everyone to the pit right along with them. Have mercy over the sheep and have mercy over the shepherds, the influencers, the leaders. For you will not that the wicked shall perish, but that the wicked shall turn from his evil ways. Have mercy over me, Father, and help me be a man of integrity, that I be always the same when I'm on the microphone and when I'm buying groceries with my wife, when I'm at work, and in all other areas, Father, where nobody else is watching but you and Satan. We praise your name in the mighty name and authority of Yeshua HaMashiach. Amen ve'amen. Thank you for watching. If the mighty wills, see you tomorrow. Shalom, shalom.